Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Tampa. My name is Ed Benedict. I'm your worship associate today. I've been a member of this church now for 25 years, and it's been my pleasure to serve it. I'm especially glad to welcome you this morning on the third Sunday in June, June 19th, which just happens to be Father's Day. More on that later from our speaker, which is, of course, our minister today, the Reverend Dr. Jim Macomber. If you're with us for the first time today, second or the third or the fourth, as a visitor, welcome, and we hope that you will have an experience today that will bring you back. If you want to learn more about us, there's information on the back of your order of service. We have listed our principles, along with our covenant for this particular church and this church's mission. We also hope that you'll hang around after service for coffee and conversation, which follows. Just follow the crowd out to the area in front of the gazebo and the multi-purpose building. And you don't have to drink the coffee. There's cold beverages, too. We're going to open this morning our service with the stone ritual, in which I'm going to place 3 stones. One will be for a joy that we may have had during the past week. The second will be for a sorrow you may have experienced during the past week. And the third one is to set an intention for the following week, for the joy, for the sorrow, for your intention. And now our Reverend Dr. Jim Macomber will have some words for the Chalice Lighting.
Thank you, Ed. And I would add one thing, that do try the coffee. I've had coffee in a lot of UU congregations over the years, and the stuff here is pretty good. I'm not sure that says much for the other churches, but you guys do a good job with that. These words for Chalice Lighting come from Peter Fredericks. For sleepless nights, awaiting the curfew breakers. For anxious hours as a driving instructor. For hours spent on sidelines cheering. And watching school plays, sometimes resting our eyes for the pressure of breadwinning, and wait till your father gets home for teaching moments and mentoring moments, for making up answers when you just don't know, but are expected to, because you know everything. For scrapes and boo-boos and kisses and Band-Aids, for hugs and kisses and silliness and play. For bedtime stories and early morning ice time. For all the aftershave and ties received as gifts. For handing over the car keys and waves goodbye. For father-daughter wedding dances. And cradling grandchildren for the first time. For all the moments and all the meaning. In the role of a lifetime, we light our chalice. For fathers, for fatherhood, and for fathering. Thank you, Ed. And some opening words from Lorraine McNeil. She writes, "Today is Father's Day, a day in which we honor and offer gratitude for our fathers, in whatever form or fashion they come into our lives. Biological fathers, stepdads, adoptive and foster fathers, grandfathers, spiritual fathers, uncles, brothers, aunts, mothers, sisters, friends, who, whether they know it or not, help to fulfill the role of father in someone's life. We are shaped by their presence and their absence, by how they choose to act and when they abstain, what they say, and when they remain silent. Let us remember today and always the impact that these people have on us as individuals and as a community. Let us also remember that this relationship is not one-sided, and that we, as a community, are called to support and empower the fathers of this world, no matter how they came into the roles and regardless of their relative successes or failures. Let us raise up their triumphs, and let us have the grace to forgive them their all too human failures. Let us love our fathers and each other. Come, let us worship together. I keep thinking about the closing stanza of the Shel Silverstein poem I read a few minutes ago. And then I went and showed my dad, and he got red in the cheeks, and closed his eyes and shook his head, too proud of me to speak. Indeed, I would wager that we've all had such moments with our fathers or whoever in our lives fathered us. We did something really dumb, but Dad or whoever just closed his or her eyes and shook his or her head. Later he may have spoken about it, trying to show us the errors of our ways, trying to get us to be just a little more thoughtful. My recollection is that sometimes my dad would, at some point, explain my mistakes to me, and sometimes he would just let it lie and let me figure it out for myself. Sometimes he tried both of these approaches. Most memorable in this scenario were the times he helped me with my college algebra. For some reason, solving quadratic equations using the complete the square method comes to mind. He just couldn't get me to recognize the pattern of those equations. They invariably contained perfect squares as coefficients. You all remember that, right? I remember struggling with that, and he struggled trying to teach me. He was better at all this helping and coaching, I think, than I was as a father. I had many of those same kinds of close my eyes and shake my head moments with my kids, but sometimes had trouble just letting things lie. Couldn't let them figure it out on their own. I had to give them the lecture. But sometimes less is more. Anyway, that's how I remember it. I imagine that every father wishes he could have done things at least a little better. I look back and see that in my own efforts at fathering, but I'm not sure my dad could have done much better, simply because he was, as best I recall, not really in need of improvement. So for me, that near-perfect male figure from my formative years was my dad. I hope that we can all look back and recall such a person as being part of our respective lives. It may not have been our father, It may have been a grandfather, an uncle, a brother, a sister, an aunt, a teacher, a neighbor, or someone else. But chances are there was someone, or even several people, who modeled adult responses to our mistakes as well as our achievements. It was someone who would suggest a better way, or someone who praised our good work, someone who would model appropriately in the years when we most needed modeling. I know I've shared with many congregations at least one such instance from my own father's life. That was the snowblower story. When Dad got upset that his UU minister was doing the work of the Building and Grounds Committee that Dad chaired. The church in suburban Cleveland needed a new snowblower in order to clear the parking lot on snowy Sundays. The Building and Grounds Committee was moving ahead very deliberately, setting specs, getting bids. But the minister grew impatient. The committee was just being sluggish, unresponsive to the need, in his view. So the minister simply ordered one himself. Dad told the church board that if they didn't need him to lead Building and Grounds, and the minister had so much extra time on his hands, then they didn't need his money so much, and Dad cut his pledge. The lesson here is that Unitarian Universalist congregations are run by lay members, and ministers should not come between them and their work. At least that's the lesson I took from this story. It's why I try to make suggestions rather than demand decisions when I'm in board or committee meetings. I really try to remember my place. When I found today's reading, My Father's Things, on the UU Worship web, it really spoke to me. A shout, not a whisper. My dad has been gone for 36 years, not 28 as in the reading. But either of those is a long time. I still use some of his tools and have not exhausted the stash of nuts and bolts and screws and rivets that I inherited. I do still have his pocket knife, but it's a switchblade, so I don't carry it. Not exactly legal, you see. Why he had a switchblade, I have no idea. He was certainly no barroom brawler. Sometimes I guess our fathers present mysteries to us. I also still have at home some beautiful furniture-grade lumber, walnut and cherry mostly, that I've been carrying around the country with me for 36 years. I've used up a lot of it. Well, some of it, though, I guess I'm hoarding it, waiting for just the right wood project to use it on. Have you got things? Things that the one who fathered you gave you. Could be hardware or books or memorabilia or ideas or codes of conduct. We treasure these things our fathers give us, and we treasure their having been, or perhaps they still are, parts of our lives, as the reading goes. Some might say bathrobes and saws and codes of conduct are not exactly jewels to take to the bank. And I answer, jewels don't shine as brightly as my Father's things. Who dreamed up this day as a celebration of fathers and fathering, we may ask? According to Wikipedia, Father's Day was inaugurated in the early 20th century to complement Mother's Day in celebrating fathers and male parenting, or fathering, in other words. It began as very much a local celebration in various places. One of these was in West Virginia, near where early Mother's Day celebrations were held. That one in July of 2008 was intended to honor fathers who died in the Monongah mining disaster in December of 1907. Of 361 men killed, 250 were fathers, and roughly 1,000 children were left fatherless. Another early celebration took place in Spokane, Washington in 1910. This one was definitely in response to Mother's Day celebrations. Several ministers accepted the idea of a celebration of fathering, and so on the third Sunday in June of 1910, they all preached Father's Day sermons. President Woodrow Wilson wanted to make Father's Day an official holiday, but Congress resisted, fearing it would become commercialized. Yeah, right. Father's Day became entrenched as the third Sunday in June each year, but without any official designation until President Lyndon B. Johnson issued a presidential proclamation in 1966. Of course, Father's Day has been promoted by commercial interests since its very beginning. No surprise. By 1938, the New York Associated Menswear Retailers and the Father's Day Council that they conveniently had founded were indeed promoting Father's Day as a second Christmas for all men's-oriented industries. By then, the commercial power of Mother's Day was well established, and I'm sure those men's gift commercial interests altruistically wanted only equal recognition for fathering. Yeah. A contemporaneous spike in the demand for neckties was purely coincidental. But we don't need to dwell only on the commercial aspects of Father's Day. I've shared some of my own heartfelt feelings about my father, and I very much hope those reflections have encouraged you to do the same as you have listened. For some of us, that male parenting figure was our biological father. For some of us, that male parenting figure was someone else. It matters more, in my mind, that someone modeled fathering in our lives more than it matters who did that modeling. I hope all of us can look back to someone somewhere who fulfilled the need for healthy fathering. There are times when I wish I could discuss with my dad the challenges we face today, to consult with him on what we need to do. Today's challenges seem so different from those we faced a generation or two ago. The many civil rights movements have taken center stage in our little UU denomination, as well as in this country. Why should some be denied constitutional protections because of their identity? Violence has erupted as a result of every one of these movements. We lament, is this what the American dream is all about? Is American life a zero-sum game, and groups have no right to keep some other groups from commandeering part of their stuff? You know, the stuff they rightly stole from somebody else. Is this what we're now all about? I want to ask my dad about these things. I also want to ask my dad about the new national and international norms of violence, of terrorism. Have we brought it on ourselves? Dad, how much are we to blame? Can it be that we have cornered the market on goodness and those other people are totally at fault? Is the idea of American exceptionalism, manifest destiny and all that stuff, nothing more than nationalistic narcissism? Is Americanism the problem, the solution, or somehow both? Help me out here, Dad. And the violence, so easily perpetrated by sociopaths and the mentally ill. How does this have anything to do with a well-regulated militia? Why do so few speak about the fact that back in 1788, local militia members, forerunners of today's National Guard, generally provided their own muskets? Those were weapons that, mind you, a highly skilled rifleman could use to deliver about 2 well-aimed rounds per minute. Not the 2 per second that assault rifles can now do. Why can't we agree that we don't need military assault rifles unless we are carrying out military assaults? What do you think, Dad? Is it about protecting your homestead, or is it really about gun makers' profits? Dad, what about this? And now, with the terrible slaughter in Texas a couple of weeks ago, we seem to have all these contemporary issues just piling on top of one another. The civil rights, the uncontrolled access to weapons whose sole purpose is to kill people, the terrorism encouraged by hate groups, the notion that we must fight hate with more hate, the fairy tale that more violence will silence violence, that someone else's Second Amendment rights trump my rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Dad, help me sort this out. I do wish I could consult my dad about these things, have him share his wisdom. I'm not sure we would agree on what seems to have happened, or even on what we should be doing about it. I would certainly value his counsel, but about the best I can do on this Father's Day is to reflect on what I think he might say. A reflection necessarily based on the ideals, the ethics, the code of conduct he instilled in me. Perhaps whoever fathered you is still around to share a discussion with you. If so, I hope you'll do so. If he or she is not, then you have to draw conclusions from whatever evidence is already available. Whichever it is for each of us, I hope that we will all make the effort. You see, this is our last regular service of the church year, pretty much. There are less formal services coming up during the summer, but we shall have plenty of time to reflect on what we ought to be saying and doing about the horrific tribulations that confront our communities. I hope that come September, those dedicated to this church community will once again gather and set about making justice for all of humanity. I urge you to come back with some ideas about what this community can concretely do. Today, Father's Day, is a good day to begin our reflections, and I fervently invite you to do so. May it be so, and amen. I'm going to take a few minutes to pass around among the folks in the congregation this morning with the microphone and invite you to share a brief thought about your father or someone who fathered you. And let us then share some of those things together. So if you'll please raise a hand if you'd like to have a word with us.
Now, I have two things. First is about how my daddy was raised. He grew up in Georgia, and in the 1930s he was with my granddaddy, and Daddy saw a black man drinking out of the white water fountain. And my daddy told him the black man to my grandfather. My grandfather said, "He ain't hurting nobody." That tells you about how my granddaddy raised his kids and his family. And when you talked about Shel Silverstein and that story there, my brother and I and a friend were doing something really, really, really stupid. We were torturing ants with gasoline, and somehow we caught this gasoline can on fire. And how we put it out, I never know. But Dad came out a little later. It didn't say a darn thing, but we had to use that gasoline can every time we mowed the yard. But I know he had to be really happy that he still had his kids and his house.
And the gasoline, too.
Hi there. Back when I was learning to drive, just beginning, I decided to go out and back up and down on the driveway just to practice turning on the car and going 15 feet, you know. And somehow or another, I managed to get the car sideways on the driveway. And I was like so upset that I had to go get my dad because I was worried about the driveway and the car and the grass.
Hi, I'm Ann Chin. I am relatively new in the area the last couple of years. I'm with my husband here. And I'm glad that I've finally been able to get here on the last day of your services. No, I've been here a couple of times. But anyway, my father happens to be now on his deathbed. A couple of days ago, he's been in hospice for a while. A couple of days ago, my sister informed me, he lives out of state, that he was no longer speaking and responding and no longer eating. And so I would ask for your prayers or your positive thoughts right now to help me through this time. It's difficult.
My dad was a professional golfer. He never did the circuit, but he was a pro at a club and was the greenskeeper. And I'll never forget when, and he was, in high school, he was a big basketball star. And so he was very involved in sports. And I never cared a hoot about sports. And when I was in college, I was forced to play on a intramural basketball team as part of my sorority duties. And my name was mentioned in, I think it was the only, points I ever scored, but it was mentioned in the school newspaper, way down somewhere. And it was the only time my father ever wrote to me the whole time I was in college, or ever, as far as I can remember. My mother had written a long letter, and he had actually written in the bottom, great job, playing basketball, yada, yada. And then later on in life, my husband played golf, so went out with my dad to play golf, and of course I hadn't had a club in my hand in years, and my dad said to me, he said, you still have a nice swing, you're really good at it. And I said to him, I know, but it's so boring. And I know he loved me after that, but maybe not quite so much.
Boring. Wow.
I grew up thinking my father didn't even love me or want me. And if I could tell him today, I'd like to hug him and tell him I understand now. Sometimes fathers have to play roles that they're not allowed to show, maybe love and respect or nurturing. And but my father was a nurturer. He just didn't have the opportunity to nurture us children. And looking back, I can see how that man adored me and loved me my whole life. So sometimes our fathers look like somebody they're not. And sometimes inside them is somebody really beautiful. So I love my father.
My father came of the generation that men sometimes were not too involved in their children's lives. But my best memory of him is when he found the Unitarian church in Miami, and on Sunday morning he invited me to go with him, and we used to drive down US 1 to the church, and we had some of the best conversations on the way to that church, that probably more than conversations I ever had with my father.
Thank you. Okay, a couple more hands here. Over here.
Having been raised by a single mother, I met a curmudgeonly old Irishman sitting in the breezeway of the Miami church by the name of Chuck Hardy. A few people here probably know him, and I'd like to remember him as somebody who was a father to so many people.
My mom and dad were both born in Italy. They came over at separate times. My dad was 18 years old. He came through Ellis Island, could not speak a word of English. He went into New York, found a job as a busboy in a restaurant, in a hotel. 2 years later, he was a head chef, and he learned how to speak English in 2 years. And he figured, well, there's got to be some other way to see this country. New York's okay. How can I do this and not cost too much money? I know. I'll join the Barnum and Bailey Circus. And he did. And he's traveled around the West with the circus. That's back in the days when they had the big tent and they had a parade through town. And he did that. And he saw quite a bit of the country. And then he said, there must be some other way I can do this. And he joined the Metropolitan Opera Company. Not because he could sing. I've inherited that non-trait. And he joined the Metropolitan Opera Company, traveled around the country, got to Philadelphia. And this friend of his said, would you like to go out on a date with this Italian girl? My dad said, sure. So he went to the opera wardrobe, got a nice suit, a pair of shoes, a hat, went calling on this young girl. And you guess by now who that is, right? My mother. And my mother said she was looking out the window, waiting for this guy to arrive, and he walked up to walk, and her father, my grandfather, was looking over her shoulder and said, Esther, I don't know who that is, but I hope you marry him someday. And he was a carpenter and a bricklayer and a mason, and he worked at that trade all his life. He was a great cook, and he introduced me to the mountains. We went to Catskills every year. We go hiking, and I developed a love for nature. And he was a great cook, and I remember they put food on their table, and I better darn well eat it. Manja, manja. That was my dad.
Thanks, Ken.
My dad grew up without a father, and his father died when he was 3, so he took it very seriously that when he became a father that he was going to be a father and show us everything and show us the world and teach us the world, and he was great.
We have any folks upstairs there that want to? Okay.
My father always told me when I was a little girl that I could do or be anything I wanted to. And I've always thought that was a pretty amazing thing for a man, a father, to tell his daughter in the 50s.
One more back here. Okay. I didn't see your hand.
My favorite excursions with my father was every Sunday afternoon to the library. And he helped me develop my love of reading and love of books.
My father thought I was going to be the first woman on the moon.
You still could be, right? Is my history okay there? You still could be there.